Hello and welcome to On the Cube Leadership Podcast, where we take everyday events that are happening in the news and put a little bit of a spin on them so that we can learn to be better leaders. We can learn from those situations. And look, today we are going to talk about abuse of power. That's right. I'm sure you have experienced or you know a story of someone who has been, suffered under, a leader abusing their power. We all hear the stories in news. We talk about it regularly, or of all our, some of the challenges we see in politics and in business and in ministry. Unfortunately, there is abuse of power, and look, let's be honest, sometimes it's just use of power. And so today, I'm joined once again by Dr. Rod St. Hill. Dr. Rod, welcome. Welcome again.
How are you, Craig? It's really good to be with you again.
Good to be with you as well. Now, sometimes that abuse is good, and sometimes the use of power is good, and sometimes it is more of an abuse of power. And we're going to discuss that today. And look, as always, bit of a disclaimer, we don't know everything about these situations, nor do you. None of us know the exact details of all these situations. So we're only looking at these situations from the information that we have in front of us, presented in front of us, and then interpreting that of how we can learn to be better leaders ourselves and hopefully avoid abusing power, but also don't be afraid of using the power, because sometimes we can use it for good. We're going to be talking about Joe Rogan. We're going to be talking about Mark Cuban. We're going to be talking about Joe Biden and Hunter Biden. We're going to be talking about Jerry Falwell. We're going to be talking about, who else are we talking about? A whole bunch of different, we're going to be talking about Putin, that's right, and the Wagner group and stuff like that. So we're going to be talking about a whole different range of things that are happening that are abuse or just good use of power. And so we're going to discuss that. But let's get into that first topic. First topic we're going to be talking about is Joe Rogan fights Mark Cuban. That's right. Joe Rogan fights Mark Cuban. Now, there was this, I watched this on Timcast, release about this thing that's happening. I don't know whether you've seen it, but what's happening is Joe Rogan did an interview with RFK, and RFK was talking about his vaccines and all this so-called misinformation around vaccines. And there's been this little bit of a spat on Twitter now, and Joe Rogan has then now publicly said, hey, I'll put up $100,000 for someone to debate, or actually for Dr. Peter Hotez, who to debate about vaccines. And they go back and forwards, and there's a spat on Twitter. Mark Cuban, a whole bunch of other people jump in and offer a bunch of money. Andrew Tate offers money. Patrick Bet David, who we're going to be talking about a little bit later as well, throws up some money. And I think the pool that they're offering for this debate to go to charity is now in the $4 to $5 million now that the people have put up. So there's a lot of money that's going around to be debated about these vaccines. Now, obviously, the vaccines is a touchy topic, right? It's a contentious topic, and there's a lot of misinformation out there. Obviously, during COVID, there was everyone was being wiped off YouTube and other social medias if they ever mentioned vaccines in a negative way or anything like that, and. Joe Rogan is somewhat of an anti-vaxxer, and same with RFK. Dr. Peter Hotez obviously is a big advocate for vaccines, and they're claiming that RFK is just touting a lot of misinformation. All the stuff that he's saying is incorrect. And Joe's just saying, well, you know what? If you think what he's saying is incorrect, come and debate him, right? And I think that there's arguments that they're bullying and stuff like that. But I feel like, and why I actually wanted to start out with this is we when we're talking about use or abuse of power, we tend to just focus on people abusing their power rather than using it for good. And so I wanted to start off on a good topic like this, where it's good evidence of someone like Joe Rogan using the power that he has for good. Now, I know he might push a little bit of misinformation. He might be an anti-vaxxer or whatever side of the aisle you stand on with vaccines. We're not here to debate that. But I kind of like the fact, Dr. Rod, that Joe Rogan is using his power to be able to generate a conversation, to be able to use his power, which is platform, which is reach. He's probably the largest podcast on the planet. He's probably got the most influence when it comes to media. And he's not only giving up his platform, he's also giving up some of his money. And to be able to encourage a conversation, a healthy conversation, which I think is great. And this kind of, the reason why I wanted to highlight is this: I believe this is a good use of power. That sometimes we talk down on people wanting to be famous, wanting to be wealthy, and things like that. And it's spoken down to, especially in the church circles, that money and fame and everything is bad. But this is an example of why it's important for us to have a platform, while it's important for us to have some sort of influential power and some finances behind us, because, hey, rather than there be this backyard spat or whatever, we can now have Joe Rogan's offering his power, his platform and his money for a healthy debate. What's your take on this situation?
Well, by and large, I would agree with you, Craig. I think both Professor Peter Hotez and RFK, they've gone public with their views. They are now very well known, and it makes some sense to bring them into a debate. I notice that some commentators are saying, well, that's the only way we'll get at the truth. I wouldn't have that much confidence in the outcome of a debate. But both of these people are now public figures, and they clearly take different sides of the debate on vaccines. And so I think there is a lot of sense in people like Joe Rogan, who have got a very large followership, to host a debate. And Joe Rogan, he's a good guy. I think his approach, I think, to journalism is the kind of approach that should be being taken by the mainstream media, which of course it doesn't. And the mainstream media tends to push its own barrow, so to speak. So look, I think what Joe Rogan has offered to do is a very good thing. And, I certainly hope that as antagonist, RFK, and as protagonist, Peter Hotez actually get to do a debate, if not on Joe Rogan's podcast and on some other social media or other media that has a large audience.
So let's pull this back to us as leaders, right? Not all of us have a platform like Joe. Not all of us have the money to be able to just throw out $100,000 for someone to have a conversation. What do you think the lesson is here for us as everyday leaders, let's call us?
Oh, look, I think this points to us needing to use whatever power, influence, whatever money we have for the common good. And I think a debate about vaccines is something which ought to happen for the common good. I've got a particular view. It doesn't really matter what that is, but I think once people with a high profile go public, then I think they do have a responsibility to respond to as many invitations as they possibly can. Now, I know I've said on this podcast before, you have the right to remain silent, so to speak, and that you don't have to respond to the media. But it's a little bit different in a sense when you've made the first approach.
Yes, and
so
when you're meant to be the authority on that topic.
Well, RFK is not necessarily an authority, but he's put himself forward as a candidate for the presidency of the United States. So that's the most high-profile job on the planet. And because he's publicly stated his views, particularly about the relationship between vaccines and autism, and obviously he's got a lot of views on the COVID vaccines, he's made that public already. So that's now part of his profile as a potential candidate for the presidency of the United States. So he's got a very public profile and obviously some influence, because I believe about 20% of voters would back him for president of the United States, or at least for selection as a candidate. So he's got a high profile. He's got quite a following. And Professor Peter Hotez, of course, has made a lot of public statements over the last few years. He's a very strong proponent of vaccines. So both have a high public profile. I think once you've come out in the public, when you are invited to a debate by someone as sensible as Joe Rogan, then I really think you should take it up. So good on Joe Rogan and the others who have backed it in, and great for the charity that wins out in the end.
And so I suppose one thing like that I take away from this as a leader is we don't be afraid to use the platform that we've got, right? Because I think nowadays we're trying to, I think we tend to be afraid, or maybe there is, how do I say this? There is fear of being attacked if we actually step up and do anything outside of what is the norm expected. And so I'd encourage people, like, use your platform. And you don't need as big of a platform as Joe Rogan has, but you can use your platform, right? We've all, whatever you've got, there is something, like the story of Moses at the burning bush. It's like, well, use what's in your hand. Whatever is in your hand, you do have something to use. But talking about this debate, and one thing that I found very interesting was, and why we're actually talking about Joe Rogan fighting Mark Cuban, is Patrick Bet-David on PBD podcast. They were talking about this this Twitter feud between Joe Rogan and Mark Cuban, and even Patrick Bet-David got in into the fold as well. And at the end of the day, I don't know where this quote, I think this was, I forget where this quote was coming from, but the one of them said, and I can't remember who it was, I just wrote it down here because I like the quote: the best way to combat misinformation is to provide good information. I think that was a really powerful quote, and we are up against a lot of stuff that is, we're up against a lot of stuff that is on, we're battling truth right now, right? We are battling truth, and the biggest challenge with truth is that. Sorry, Yash, you can take that screen down. Thanks, Yash. Sorry, there we go. In battling truth, we're talking about this. We spoke about this a few weeks ago about gender identity politics and what we call people and all this sort of stuff. And there's a lot of, let's say, non-truth going on around out there. And the best way to combat that is with good information. Don't shy away from it. Don't cower away, but present it with good information, right? The best way to combat misinformation is to provide good information. How do we make sure that we're providing good information? Because obviously we don't want to start an argument. We don't want to be putting people down. We don't want to, but we still need to stand up for what we believe in and present our side of the argument. How do we do that?
Oh, you're asking me that question?
Yeah.
Well, I was thinking as you were speaking, you need to be well researched. You got to invest a fair amount of time in researching before you actually come out and say anything publicly. So you've got to be fairly well convinced yourself of whatever point it is that you're making. So you do have a responsibility to undertake some research yourself, and sometimes that means going a little bit further than 15 minutes on Google. Maybe you need to go and talk to some experts. Maybe you need to reflect on your own personal experience and the experience of others. And then sometimes also I think you need to publicly recognise that you don't know the actual truth or the actual facts, but you've come to a particular position based on what information you've been able to obtain.
Yeah.
So the vaccine one is, that's a particularly difficult one, because we know that throughout history, vaccines have had an immensely positive impact on human health and average life expectancies and so on. But yet with COVID, I think many of us have lost confidence in Big Pharma. We've lost confidence in government as well because of the way in which the whole COVID vaccine issue was handled. And so many of us, I think, are in this position where we don't want to be irresponsible, but at the same time, we have to come out, and honestly say, I don't have the same confidence I used to have in Big Pharma or in government, and here's why.
Look, I like there is obviously there's this spat where Dr. Peter Hotez is avoiding the debate. RFK wants to debate on it. Joe Rogan wants to debate. Everyone's saying, well, we should have a public debate. We should have a public debate. Like you said earlier, public debate isn't necessarily the best way to get the answers. It's just the best, presenting the best person to debate. And there was comments about that maybe Dr. Peter Hotez is not the right person to be debating because it's maybe not his skill set, because debate is a skill set of its own. And I kind of agree with that, I'm not sure if a debate is necessarily the right way to go about it, but there does need to be a discussion. There needs to be dialogue back and forth. Now, with a situation like this, I would love to see an open dialogue back and forwards. Now, whether it be on Twitter or on a platform or pre-record, I don't know, but I think that each person should present their point, and then the other person should have an opportunity to go away and research it, and then respond to that thing, and then the other person should then like a debate, but rather than trying to think on your feet of what you may know offhand, but actually go away and research each item and then come back and discuss it. And I kind of wonder whether there's maybe a long form debate that could be had with this, right? Whether there's someone presents their part on a video or whatever, and then the other party gets a chance to go away, research that and debate that, respond. And then the other person gets to go away and respond. And because the whole point of this is not about proving who's right or wrong. And a lot of people are arguing that RFK's not the best person to debate because he just disregards facts and stuff like that. Now, what side of the aisle you are that you say that, there's obviously going to be some biases. But the whole point of this is, don't we as, the country, don't we as the people that are being affected by the vaccine and the decisions government make, don't we have the right to be able to learn what the real facts are and to be able to see what those facts are unfold? Like, why is it, and this is probably now, on our topic of like Joe Rogan's using his power for good, that's great, but isn't it abuse of power that they're not allowing, the government aren't allowing us, the people that are being affected by this vaccine, to actually know the real facts about it?
Look, in this case here in Australia, I believe we should have a royal commission into the whole thing, and I'm not the only one. Whether or not we're going to see that, I just don't know. I think maybe in time we will, because I think there's a lot of facts that have never become public that really ought to over the whole affair, particularly the flow-on effects, but mental health effects in particular, people being locked up. We know, for example, that there was an increase in domestic abuse during lockdown periods and so on and so forth. Look, there's so much that really needs to come out into the open. I'm particularly concerned about whether or not we allocated enough resources to the elderly and to those who are vulnerable, rather than taking this one kind of size fits all, and we go around vaccinating 5-year-old children and telling kids in school to wear masks and so on, while elderly folk were dying and people at risk weren't necessarily getting the treatment that they ought to have. We knew, for example, that people who were overweight had a higher risk of suffering complications, etc., but governments didn't do too much about that either. It's a really fraught area, and it's not the only one. There are, climate change is another one, and the whole issue of human sexual identity. These are other areas. I think it's healthy to have debates, and some people do it well. There are a handful of people who host debates very, very well. Joe Rogan is one of them. Megyn Kelly's another who does an outstanding job, in my opinion. And there are others. Ben Shapiro's another who I think would be really, really good in this kind of role. The difficulty, of course, is both sides of the argument believe they have the true facts. Yeah. And obviously they'll present them as the true facts. I think for us to be responsible, we've really got to make up our own mind, take responsibility for doing so.
How do we, though, find those facts? Because obviously there was a lot of censorship on, now only just recently YouTube have removed their ban on vaccine misinformation. And so and then obviously still some things that, like, because the RFK and Jordan Peterson video got removed from YouTube. And so how do we actually find the real information? Like, you mentioned a royal commission. Is that our last hope now, to actually find real information? And is that uncorruptible? Is that pure? Explain the royal commission to us.
Well, a royal commission operates at the behest of government, and it has, they're given all of the parameters within which they're supposed to operate. So if we have a royal commission, you appoint a commissioner who's normally someone with a background in law. I don't think it has to be, and sometimes it shouldn't be, but usually it's a retired judge or somebody with that kind of experience, and they have a whole team to assist them. And the idea is that you'll get at least the facts, if not the truth. Mm-hmm. And I think that's our best hope, at least here in Australia, of uncovering what really went on. Why it was, for example. Sorry, you go.
Are they incorruptible?
Look, there's no human system that's not incorruptible, because human beings are fallible, human beings are fallen as well. So there's no guarantee whatsoever. But in Australia, that's probably the best that we could ever offer up by way of dredging up some of the facts that haven't really come to the fore. But look, gradually information is becoming available, of course. So we can now be pretty certain that the virus was an escapee from a research laboratory in Wuhan. Yep. We can now freely say that on social media, because it's widely recognised that that's the case. When we've got people like Miranda Devine, she's an Australian. I'm very proud of her. She works for the Washington Post. She's done some sterling work here in Australia. Sherry Markson is another, done some great work in uncovering the facts for us. And look, I think ultimately there will be momentum build for something like that. But leaders have the courage to deal with the facts and to deal with the truth. And I think that one of the things we saw during the whole COVID period, and we're continuing to see, is that a lot of leaders don't have the courage to deal with it. So they go with the flow, and I think that's what happened. It happened worldwide. This is not just something confined to Australia. Here in Australia, we had an agreed plan to deal with pandemics that was revised in 2019, and we threw it out the window. We started closing our borders. We closed our national borders. We closed state borders. We had lockdowns. We had forced vaccinations, all kinds of things. People lost their jobs because they didn't want to have a vaccination, despite the fact that it's official policy in Australia that vaccination is something which is voluntary. You still can't travel outside Australia if you don't show a vaccination certificate.
Yeah.
Even now, and I know that because I travelled overseas not all that long ago, and just less than a month ago actually. So, look, we really need to have a decent investigation into this kind of stuff, and I think the only way of getting at it, at least in the Australian context, is a royal commission.
So as leaders, let's make sure that we use our platform for good. Like, make sure we use the power, use what's in our hand, use the facts. Make sure, like, let's be open to healthy debate. Let's not shy away, because through the only way to combat misinformation is good information. And so make sure that you're not cowering away from the information that you have, whether it be your industry, whether it be your faith, whatever it is that you feel like God has called you to fight against. Well, you know what? Use your platform. Use whatever's in your hand to try to spread as much good information, and don't be afraid of a healthy debate. I know that it is hard, but what's the best way to do a healthy debate is be researched, be prepared. The Bible says be ready in season and out of season. Don't wait till someone challenges you to a debate and then go away and do your research. Do your research now, as if you are going to be in a debate tomorrow, so that if you happen to come across someone that disagrees with your position, you can actually have a healthy conversation where you're both open to learning. And look, I hope that there is some way that we can finally see what the truth is. People are held accountable for misinformation, and it's funny how the left is challenging the right for all their misinformation, but really it was there was a lot of misinformation out there from both sides, and I think we need to be held accountable for that. Obviously, we need to know what our influence and our power is, and use it wisely. Know who we're influencing and why we're influencing them. And like Joe Rogan, rather than trying to force someone one way, just use your power, your platform, your influence to be able to open the dialogue for a healthy debate. So talking about healthy dialogue, let's get on to the next topic of. Actually, I'm gonna not really share too much information, and I'm gonna ask Dr. Rod a question. I'm gonna ask a question, talk about the topic, and then I'll pass it over to Dr. Rod. I'm gonna ask it to, is this nepotism? Now, what is it? So Joe Biden, obviously, this week or last week, I think it was now, last week, but Hunter Biden was caught for tax evasion and a whole bunch of other things. Obviously, we know the length of crazy stuff that he's doing. There's all these inquiries into text messages and recordings and everything of Joe Biden and Hunter Biden, and it's crazy. But you've got the son of the President of the United States that has been given a plea deal, and obviously Joe turns around and says his response was, "I'm proud of him." Yeah, okay. But obviously he's his son. He wants to protect him. He wants the best for him. Wants to get him favors and things like that. Dr. Rod, is this nepotism?
No, probably not. Nepotism really occurs when somebody sets up, say, a family dynasty. And I don't think President Biden is trying to do that, but he certainly is trying to protect his son, and he may be trying to protect himself as well. We don't know that. We certainly don't know that yet. He claims to know nothing at all about his son's business dealings, despite the fact that there's mounting circumstantial evidence, at any rate, that would seem to suggest otherwise. But look, I think there's been a lot of commentary on this, of course. But one of the things that intrigues me is that he seems to have got off scot-free on a firearms charge that other people go to jail for.
Yep.
And interestingly enough, Joe Biden actually argued that people who offend in this way should go to jail. He's done that in the Congress. He's actually stood up and argued for it. He was in favour of tightening the law on these firearms offences. So it does seem very strange indeed that his son has really got off with a slap on the wrist. He won't be going to jail. There are virtually no consequences of this firearm offence, which really does mandate a jail sentence, a custodial sentence. The degree to which the president has managed to influence the Department of Justice, we don't know. But of course, there are committees in the lower house there in Congress that are looking into this and other things. And it seems that there are more and more whistleblowers who are pointing to there being some kind of political shenanigans going on here, and that Joe Biden's son is being protected, and possibly he's being protected so that Joe Biden himself doesn't have to answer a lot of very awkward questions about the way he conducted business on behalf of the family himself.
So we're talking about using or abusing power. There seems to be somewhat of an abuse of power here. And, because there's favoritism and things like that. And then we talk about, actually, you and I last week, we had a conversation about conflicts of interest and things like that, and some of the situations that we're in, and making sure, and I want to get into that in a little bit, your definitions of the thing. But I mean, there's a thing of, okay, let's talk about our situation. So you spoke last week with me about the difference between perceived, actual, like what were the difference?
Potential, perceived, and actual conflict of interest. Yes.
Explain those. Explain the difference between those for us.
Well, a potential conflict of interest is a conflict of interest that doesn't exist yet, but might exist in the future, depending on what happens.
Yep.
A perceived conflict of interest is a conflict of interest in the eyes of other people. Mm-hmm. And an actual conflict of interest is a conflict of interest which you have and you know you have. And
yes.
Of course, other people can observe that as well.
So, let's talk about our situation briefly. Like, you're one of the directors. You're on my board. You're also on a board of another organisation. That organisation was going through some struggles. Our business, which you're a director of, provides those solutions to people, and you introduced me and our organisation. You introduced the two organisations together because you know that our organisation has the ability, we have the integrity, you know us intimately, you know it's right, and because you know them intimately, you know that it's the best solution for them. And so obviously during that, we made sure, like, you removed yourself from any voting on the decision, and what were some other things that you did to avoid a conflict of interest?
Oh, look, the most important thing was to declare it so everybody
Yes.
knew about it. And that would be a case of an actual conflict of interest, because the more that COS International thrives, the more my own church benefits.
Yes.
Because COS International supports my church and I'm
Yep.
the pastor of the church.
Mm-hmm.
So although there's no money going directly into my pocket, obviously my whole life revolves around Ignite Life Church here on the Gold Coast. And to the extent that Cause International thrives, Cause International supports the church. And so clearly there's a conflict of interest.
Yes.
And as a director, I've got a legal responsibility to make sure everybody on the board knows that that conflict exists. It's up to the board, by the way, to then decide how they're going to handle it. Mm-hmm. And the way in which we've handled it is to say I can be at board meetings when the project is being discussed, but I cannot vote. So I can even say something if I want to, but I cannot vote. So I can't use my position as a director to influence any decision that the board makes about, say, renewing the contract or extending the contract or anything like that. Yeah. Because I've clearly got a conflict of interest. There's a direct line between Cause International and Ignite Life Church, and I'm the pastor at Ignite Life Church. Yeah. So that's an example of an actual conflict of interest.
And so the thing is everyone talks negatively about conflicts of interest or nepotism and all that sort of stuff where, someone employs someone or recruits someone that they know and stuff like that. And I know that it's spoken about negatively. Like you got someone like Joe Biden, he's protecting his son, he's opening up the door for opportunities for his son and stuff like that, and it's all looked on negatively. But I mean, we're doing it. Like, you open up the door for me and our organisation to benefit from this deal, but not because we're trying to do something untoward or under the table or anything. It's like, no, you know that I can deliver on the services. You can trust me, and so isn't it best to? What I'm trying to say is, I kind of get that a parent or a friend will try to help out a friend with a business deal or whatever. What's that line that's it should be okay for us to help friends out, and when we're going into business with people, wouldn't we prefer to go into business with someone that we know and like and trust and kind of already understand them, rather than bringing in a stranger into the deal and things like that? Like, how do we balance? Because we as leaders will be employing friends and family and things like that. How do we make sure that we're still making the best decision and also can't be done for nepotism or conflicts of interest?
Look, I don't have any objection whatsoever to businesses or churches, for that matter, employing people they know. I think there are some dangers in employing family, and we might talk about this a little later in our program, but I don't think that there should be a prohibition on it at all. Mm-hmm. The main issue there is, if you're appointing a son or daughter to succeed you as CEO of the business or as senior pastor in a church, you better make sure they're competent.
Yes.
In other words, you really still need to satisfy the criterion, are they the best person for the job? Now, sometimes, you can't go and check out everybody on the planet, so there have to be some parameters that you place on it. And when it's really important, for example, to preserve culture or to maintain trade secrets and so on, look, sometimes the best thing to do is to employ someone from your family or someone whom you've known and been friendly with for a long period of time. Look, I often think it is better to grow your people rather than draw them from outside the organisation. So I don't think there's an issue with that whatsoever. But getting back to the Biden family case, this appears to go way, way, way beyond any kind of nepotism or looking out for your family. I don't know whether everybody watching this podcast is aware that Hunter Biden's lawyer has admitted that a WhatsApp exchange, which has become publicly available, actually took place. And that really looks as if there was a bit of extortion going on. And at least according to that WhatsApp exchange, President Joe Biden, he wasn't president at the time, of course. I think he was actually a candidate. I don't think he was vice president at the time, but it appears as if he was in the room, so he was party to the conversation. Yep. Now, Obviously, we don't know the full truth there. We don't know whether Hunter Biden was bluffing, but $5 million plus flowed as a result of that transaction.
Yeah.
Now, the response really to that has been, listen, you can't blame Joe Biden for being supportive of his son, and you got to remember that his son was a crack addict at the time, and that causes people to behave in ways that people wouldn't normally behave.
Yeah.
I happen to believe that that doesn't mean you've got no responsibility.
Yes.
So, look, you know, when we're talking about things like this, is very, very different to the kinds of things we've been discussing, like appointing a son or daughter to succeed you as the senior pastor of a church or CEO of a business. That's really quite different because there's nothing illegal about it. Look, if all of this was happening, if Hunter Biden was making representations to companies in the Ukraine and in China and using his father's position as leverage, then he was acting as an agent. He wasn't registered as an agent. So, look, you know, it raises all kinds of issues that really have to be dealt with. Whether or not they're going to be dealt with, who knows? It may be that following the elections in November 2024, if the Republicans have reasonable majorities in both the Senate and in the lower house in the Congress there, and if we have a Republican president, then things might change. And I mean, I hope we don't stoop to third world standards and just try and jail everybody in the previous regime. I hope that doesn't happen. But I certainly hope there is an attempt to get the truth out of this. But I do think it's significant that Hunter Biden's lawyer has admitted, yes, that WhatsApp transcript is actual. Now the question is whether or not Joe Biden was actually in the room listening to the conversation at the time.
It was just a threat.
But I mean, this goes way, way, way beyond conflict of interest. It goes way beyond any discussions about nepotism. This is about betraying your country in order to make money for your family. Yeah. And if that's what's been going on, then that's very, very serious indeed. Much, much more serious than any kind of breach of conflict of interest.
Yeah, and I agree. I suppose the reason why I brought it up is this is kind of an extreme. And then I'm like, I know please, I'm not excusing any of the stuff that they've done. If it's true, it's terrible and all that sort of stuff. But I'm just, in theory, you know, a parent or someone helping out a friend in business or someone in family in business, you know, like, where's the line? Because I kind of went, well, you know, we've been in that situation recently, and we've navigated that, and there is advantages to it, like you say, recruiting someone that's within your family or friends group. At least you know that culture's right, or you know, like especially, passing on, like, so for example, passing on the senior pastor of a church to your son or daughter. They've obviously spent years under your discipleship, you know, like under your leadership, and they've seen you navigate the tough times so obviously they've had so much training that there is an advantage to it. But like Dr. Rod said, he didn't say it directly, but it's okay to be able to support and to provide opportunities for our friends and family, but let's just make sure that they're most competent. Let's make sure that they are the ideal person for the role. Make sure, hey, remove yourself from the situation and get someone else to do the recruitment. Put them forward as a recommendation, and leave it to a third party or a board or a team to be able to recruit someone, a third party, external, that is able to make the decision and take all things into consideration to make sure there's no favoritism. Make sure you're declaring any conflicts of interest. I think that was a good point that Dr. Rob was saying is hey, it's okay to use the people you know and like and trust, and that's okay. But make sure we declare our position, make sure nothing's under the table, don't hide anything, keep everything out in the open so that we can continue to all grow and encourage and support each other together, but doing it with integrity.
But can I say, Craig, look, if it's a private company, say a family company, of course you're going to employ your family.
Yeah.
You'll pay the price if you're employing family members who are not who are not competent. There's no doubt about that. I know a lot of family companies where the children go off to university and they get useful degrees that they can then apply back in their family business. And the ones that really succeed, they don't start off at the top in their family business. They start off somewhere near the bottom. So they learn the ropes as they go. And look, I applaud that. I mean, I think that's great. I think, in fact, we should have a lot more family companies that operate that way. Look, it's very common here in Australia, say for farming families to do this, when the children graduate from high school, they go off to university and they learn agricultural science or they learn marketing or accounting or something like that. They get some experience by working, say, for a company in the big city, and then they come back to the farm and they apply their skills and their experience. And believe you me, a lot of agricultural businesses are benefiting from children who have gone away to study things like marketing and so on. And with blockchain technology and so on, you can establish your own brand, and people who buy your product can actually trace product right back to the paddock, where the cattle were grazing, or the paddock where the sheep from which your woolly jumper comes. Look, it's just brilliant. So I think we just have to be a bit careful that things are a little bit different on the political scene, where somebody could actually compromise the interests of a nation in order to line their pocket and the pockets of family members. I think that's the big issue that we're observing in the case of the United States right now. But, when we're talking about a family company or something like that, I applaud families that set out to do this in life. But just know this, if you appoint a son or a daughter who doesn't know how to handle money or who hasn't acquired appropriate skills or experience, you're going to pay the price.
Yeah, that's true. And I actually, kind of going on, our ultimate theme of what I believe true leadership is discipleship. I think that, go back to my point of, if you've got children, usually those children have been discipled properly. Because they've lived with you, they've gone through the process, they've gone through the ups and downs. You've been able to mentor them, as long as you've done it properly, and as long as you haven't been an absentee parent and too busy focusing on the business and not focusing on mentoring your children. But I think there's then, like you talk about, there's a lot of benefit to children taking on a family business, and there is so much advantage. And it goes back to discipleship. How do we want to raise up the best leaders? Well, we need to be able to spend time. We need to allow them to spend time with us, allow them to grow. Like you said before, Dr. Rod, it's better to grow a leader than it is to bring one in. And so it's really important that when we are looking at raising up leaders, and we as leaders, we're only as good as the leaders that we're raising up. The best way to do that is through discipleship, spending time together, allowing them to see the ups and downs, doing life together, teaching them in the everyday moments, rather than trying to just give them a 13-week induction program. Yeah, we teach a 13-week induction program, but true discipleship. And okay, all right, shameless plug. I haven't done one yet this episode. Shameless plug. Down in the description, there is a link to our free leadership development program, which is all based on discipleship. Understanding true discipleship is the foundation of our free leadership development program. So check it out below, and we'll hopefully that will help you. So let's avoid abusing power, in hiring the wrong people and nepotism and all that sort of stuff. Let's avoid abusing power, but let's use wisdom in making sure we are recruiting the right people. Abuse of power. Let's talk about Putin. Putin, however else you want to pronounce it. Abusing power. Well, there's someone else that's abusing power, the Wagner Group. Now, I put this this on the list a couple of days ago, and a lot has actually transpired since then. They're now no longer in the so the Wagner group is a mercenary group that have now decided to go against Vladimir Putin and make a charge on them, abusing their power of the manpower that they have. Then there's this argument that maybe it's not them, maybe it's the CIA pulling strings and abusing power to try to control things. And now the Wagner group is no longer. They did an assault on Putin, trying to take him down. Then one of the other leaders got in, Belarus, I think it was. They got involved and said, no, it's going to be bad for the country and everything. So they're now stopped. They did a deal. Now they get free passage and out. And just, oh my, Dr. This is a mess, right? There is so many people abusing power over in Russia and stuff like that. What's your take on this whole situation?
Oh, man, you couldn't write a novel like this, could you? It's crazy. But look, I've got to read his name, Yevgeny Prigozhin.
I didn't even try.
He's the head of the Wagner group. Mm-hmm. At least formerly a friend of Vladimir Putin. We don't know what their relationship is like now. But let me tell you this. There's no way in this wide world a force of 25,000 people could ever get into Mexico, could ever get into Moscow, much less in the Kremlin. 25,000, not enough people.
No.
And they don't control the nuclear weapons. So I don't know what's behind this. It may just be a great big joke. We know, of course, that Prigozhin is now in Minsk in Belarus, and those of the mercenaries with the Wagner group apparently have been absorbed into the Russian army. I don't know where the abuse lies, whether maybe it's abuse of the West, just confusing us. All these news organisations talking about a coup on Putin. That's a joke. There's no way in this wide world a force of 25,000 mercenaries, they wouldn't even get into Moscow. The place is too well fortified, and Putin could have pulled up at least 100,000 soldiers in next to no time. So I think there's a bit of a show going on here. Certainly power is being wielded unusually. There's no doubt about that. And I just think it's ludicrous to think that all of this was a shock and a big surprise to Putin. He's got far better intelligence operatives than that. They would have known what was going on. So, to see the Ukrainian leaders say, this is evidence that Putin is going down and he's not very well organised, all this sort of stuff. No. And look, perhaps one of the issues which has become apparent is that the Russian army itself hasn't done so well because it appears that a lot of the battles that have been won by the mercenaries.
Yes.
Yeah. So that might have some implications for the way for the leaders, the military leaders in Russia, who maybe are not as good as some people might think they are. Look, I guess when we're talking about abuse of power, the whole issue in war, and there's a war going on, we must remember this, is that the first casualty is truth. They say that the first casualty of war is truth. And the big abuse, of course, it's abuse of truth. We don't know what the truth is. We really have no idea to what extent the CIA was involved, although I understand the CIA have actually made some comments, at least recognising that they have been involved in Russia during the period of the war over the last year and a bit. I suppose that's something of an admission, but I guess everybody knew that they must be there. So that's one thing. some people are saying, well, actually, this whole thing was orchestrated because there's a lot of angst against the military leaders in Russia, and this is really a way of getting them out. I don't know whether that's true or not. So the thing is, we don't know the truth. It's the truth, really, which is being abused here. And look, as leaders, we need to take that pretty seriously. So, and when look in the corporate world, truth is a casualty as well. When we get involved with PR and disaster management, all these kinds of things, leaders, you need to be so careful about doing damage to the truth.
So the point that I kind of wanted to jump on with this is the coup, right? The Wagner or the Wagner group, however you pronounce it, obviously trying to do a coup.
Well, I don't know,
Putin,
honestly.
Right? Who knows?
Western media think about it, but I got my doubts. As I say, that mob, 25,000, they're not big enough, and they're not well equipped enough they couldn't possibly have succeeded in the coup. It just wouldn't have happened.
Yeah. It might have just all been a show. Who knows what it was? But let's go. Like I said, none of this stuff, we know the reality of it, but we just take it as a metaphor. There was a coup attempt, right? That is a bit of an abuse of power. That's, a second in charge or someone lower, a leader below, gathering together their troops and fighting against the regime that they're meant to be fighting for. That's a bit of an abuse of power because we tend to just see the abuse of power being from the top, right? Well, it's the leader, it's the top leader that they're the only one that abuses power. But sometimes we as the followers or secondary leaders or 2ICs or whatever, we can have an abuse of power too. And I suppose what I want to get on is mutiny attempts, coups. We see them hurt churches so much. You see so many church splits and everything like that because a 2IC or the church leadership, kind of form a coup or a mutiny against the senior pastor or whatever and abuse their power and the influence that they have and the inside knowledge they have of certain things or whatever and split a church and try to gather so many people against them to go against the senior pastor or the business owner or whatever it may be. And the reason why I wanted to bring this up is I see that as an abuse of power. I see that as this obviously you've seen this a lot. Dr. Rodney, I know.
I've seen it too often, far too often. Yeah. How do we best advise those people that are sitting under poor leadership? We talk all the time that our mission is to eradicate poor leadership. Once again, shameless plug below. Mission to eradicate poor leadership. Leadership development program below is how we believe we're fighting against and eradicating poor leadership. Yes, there's poor leadership. But is a coup the right way to go about fixing it? Well, Craig, you and I have often talked about your dream of ridding the world of poor leadership. It doesn't mean ridding the world of poor leaders. It means changing poor leaders, make them good leaders. So the issue is leadership, not necessarily the leaders. Mm-hmm. Look, often when a church split happens, it's not necessarily because the senior pastor is a poor leader. Mm-hmm. It's more often the fact that someone a little bit lower down in the ranks covets leadership.
Oh,
that definitely is an abuse of power. See, we should never covet another person's gifting or another person's assignment.
Yes.
That comes from God. I think it's a terrible sin when people do covet another person's gifts or another person's ministry or the assignment that some other. We're not, the 10 Commandments, don't covet. Mm-hmm. Don't covet your neighbour's ox. Don't covet your neighbour's wife. Don't covet anything of your neighbour's. Your senior pastor is your neighbour. Don't covet what your senior pastor has. I've seen a lot of church splits. I haven't seen one yet that was genuinely a split cause because the senior pastor was a really bad leader. It always happened because someone else decided they wanted to be a leader. Now, I'm not saying that sometimes this might be justified, but then the right way to go about it, I think, is through if the congregation, like if that church is part of a larger denominational movement, then there are usually processes that can be initiated, and I really think that's the way you should go. And I know in my own denomination, my own movement here, the Australian Christian churches, there are methods, there are processes, and I would always urge people to go through the processes at least first. You can do a lot of damage. You do a lot of damage to people when there's a church split. You see, it's not just the leaders who are hurt. A lot of people get hurt. You know, we see similar things in businesses. It happens in the boardroom. I've had that experience myself. That's a really difficult experience to go through. It's quite difficult, actually, because directors have got to keep a lot of things confidential, particularly where individuals are concerned, say where the CEO is concerned, and sometimes a boardroom coup happens because there's a group of people who think you haven't done something right, you're not in a position where you can defend yourself because there's confidentiality to consider.
Yeah.
You know, again, don't covet what other people have. That's important. But see, on the other hand, when you're introducing this topic, one of the things that went through my mind was Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who, of course, was part of a plot to assassinate Hitler, right?
Okay.
Now, that was a good thing. Him and his co-plotters, they didn't succeed, of course, and they were executed. Not too many people would say that was a bad thing. Yes. So there can be, and I think they are rare, there can be occasions when it is the right thing to do. Yeah. But certainly in the church world and in the business world, I have not personally been aware of any occasion when it was actually the right thing to do. So I'm not denying that it is the right thing, but I think it's very, very rare.
Yeah, I think that, look, a lot of the coups or mutiny or church splits that I've experienced, they use the justification of poor leadership and their experience. But you're absolutely right. Yes, there was poor leadership. Remembering we're talking about the behavior, not the person. But the reason why they split is because they coveted that leadership position. They wanted the leadership position, so they,
Often that's the case. It's the personal ambition of the person who they build a bit of a coalition behind them, and then whammo, off they go. It happens often. But this kind of thing, it happens in businesses as well.
Yes.
It happens in businesses as well, where a senior person, not the CEO, not necessarily the owner, they go off, start up in competition and take a number of key staff with them. That happens a lot in business as well. So it's not just in the church world that this happens. A lot of people in business have had similar experiences.
Yeah. So Putin, the Wagner group, forming a coup against Putin. Leaders, we need to learn. A coup is an abuse of power. We can be, now, sometimes it's called for, but not always and very rarely. How do we know, is it right? Well, are you forming a coup because you're coveting a position, someone else's position, someone else's benefit, someone else's gain? Are you coveting that? I'd warn you to look inwards. Even if there is poor leadership at play, why are you doing it, and what is the best way to approach this? Because a coup, that's an abuse of leadership. That's an abuse of power. You're responsible for all those people that you're misleading. We spoke about church splits, and I really feel like if you cause a church split, I've seen it too many times, that most times in a church split, most of those people that end up splitting are no longer in a relationship with Christ. They're no longer a part of a church at all. And there tends to be this kind of rebellious spirit that comes from it. And I believe that you, as a leader that has instigated that coup, the mutiny or the church split, you're going to have to answer to God. Because as leaders, we are given responsibilities to look after the people we're leading. Just like all the other resources we're given, God calls us to steward them. We are going to be called into account for how we have stewarded the resources and the people we've been called to lead. So be careful. Don't form a coup because you are coveting something that someone else has. Let's make a shift now to actually a topic that look, this is actually going to be a tough topic. Talking about abuse of power. And unfortunately, this is kind of abuse of power at like the highest degree and the worst case. And there's actually a few different angles that we can look at this situation. And I absolutely hate having to talk about poor leadership within the church. I hate it. I don't do this with joy, and I don't do this for clout. I'm not chasing clout. I'm not doing this to prove how good I am and to talk down at those people at all. Once again, remember, we don't know the situation. We don't know what the actual facts are. We can only, surmise from the outside. So I just want to talk about the situation without really attacking the person, but it is really, really sad to be able to talk about a situation, especially in the ministry, of abuse of power. And unfortunately, we see it way, way too often. And I want to talk about a story that I actually saw on 60 Minutes. This was a couple of weeks ago, I think it was released. And it was a story that 60 Minutes released about Jerry Falwell. And as always, all the links are below, all the links below or whatever, of all the resources and all the articles that we're talking about and all the videos that we're referring to. This was a story by 60 Minutes talking about Jerry Falwell Jr. and his abuse of power and how he abuses power. Unfortunately, this was a story of Jerry Falwell Jr. was the son of Jerry Falwell, who was very big in the evangelistic circles, very massive in the ministry circles, in the church circles, very influential. Jerry Falwell Jr. was CEO what was the name of the university?
Liberty University.
I don't know why I was about to say Victory. I'm like, no, Liberty University. And this is a very sad story that Jerry and his wife seduced a young boy and got into, let's say, an inappropriate relationship with this. Sorry, when I say young boy, he was a man. He was a young man. He was a young
20,
man.
He was a young man with a brain who could have said no. Let me say that. But anyway,
yes. So I do actually. You're right, Dr. Right. There are two sides to this that I actually do want to kind of look at. Is one, the position of Jerry Falwell as a leader and his abuse of power, but I do actually also want to talk about Giancarlo Granda, I think that's how you pronounce his name properly, who was the victim in this. And I say victim, he was victimized, definitely, but he has some responsibility as well. So Jerry Falwell Jr. And his wife Becky got into an inappropriate relationship with this young man. Used their influence to kind of give him benefits and buy a hotel for him to manage and kind of like just showered him with opportunities and everything like that, and all the while in an inappropriate relationship. and let's just say not a Christian relationship, and not very definitely not moral, and and also was somewhat, let's say, according to this documentary, was influential in kind of backing Donald Trump and kind of opening Donald Trump to the evangelical Christian vote, etc. Now, whether he was 100% responsible for it or whatever, like who knows? But Dr. Rod, there is definitely, when you hear and you listen to this story, there's just all this. It is an abuse of power, of like just using your power to give other people opportunities, to give, kind of going back to that story that like that, what we we're talking about before is like, yeah, when you got power and influence, don't you want to be able to help those people around you? And where's the line?
Look, you could write a book about this. There are so many angles on it. But look, Craig, I think really the most important point I would like to make is this. And I'm speaking to anyone who is a leader or who aspires to be a leader. If God has given you a vision, or if you've had a vision passed on to you, in this case by Jerry Falwell Sr., you are a steward. That is a sacred role. In Jerry Falwell Jr.'s case, he was stewarding the university, Liberty University, yep. Christian University, and stewarding a large and very influential evangelical community. Yep. And he's quoted as admitting himself that he was a kingmaker, yes, and had significant influence over the election of Donald Trump to the presidency. That might be a slightly exaggerated claim because some of the data show that probably the evangelical vote wasn't as important as people would like to make out. But nevertheless, there was a lot of support for Donald Trump among evangelical circles. And Jerry Falwell Jr. was not just a leader of a congregation, but he was a leader of leaders as well. Now, one of the issues is the way in which he husbanded financial resources. So there's an allegation that he spent something like $5 million to buy up a resort for one Carlos to manage, and that in part was a deal done to keep him quiet following the sordid sexual affair he had with Becky Falwell, to which she has admitted. Yep. She's admitted that publicly. So we're not sort of telling tales or gossiping here. Now, that is not the exercise of stewardship.
Yes.
That's $5 million of money that God released for kingdom purposes that was not used for kingdom purposes. It was used for personal reasons. Second, engaging, in this case, in sexual impropriety undermines the standing of the whole church, and that means it undermines the standing of God in the community. To say nothing of hurting thousands, if not millions, of Christians who looked up to this couple as leaders. So they failed monumentally and have admitted, at least some of this, they failed monumentally as stewards appointed by God to look after people and to look after resources. And leaders, look, if you want to be a leader, and particularly if you're a leader to whom God has given a vision, and all the textbooks would say a good leader has vision, if you've got a vision from God, then you are the steward of that vision, and that's a very serious role to have, and you need to take it very, very seriously.
Yeah, that's good. And so talking to leaders, obviously, let's say on the Jerry side of this at the moment, if you're a leader and they were influencing this young man, right? They were using their power, their influence, their money. They were using all of that to really influence him. And
yes, but it was for personal reasons.
For personal, exactly.
Not for reasons that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, like we need to be very careful that we're not trying to influence young people, like influence the people we're leading for our own personal gain. Because this was purely because of that, like you said, they bought this $5 million hotel for him to manage. Now, that's a nice thing. If that's our purpose and that's what God's called us to do, is to help people like that. But they were doing it purely to try to keep this guy on the hook, or to kind of benefit a person that they were trying to seduce this young man or whatever. Like it's actually, we need to be very careful of. We can get caught up in, we want to help people, we're wanting to, do all the, give people opportunities. That's great, but are we doing it for personal gain? And if we're doing it for personal gain, that's where, no matter how good of a deed you're doing, if you're doing it for personal gain, then that's a big red flag. That's a warning. It's okay to be helping people. And where you want to be able, the people around you should, as a leader, everyone around you should be benefiting. You shouldn't be sucking from everyone. Like, you should be giving to people. Like, everyone should be, you as a leader, people should benefit from being around you. Whether it be benefit financially, benefit by growing personally, benefit by growing in knowledge and experience. They should be benefiting, and we should be facilitating that benefit. But if we're only benefiting, giving them benefit to keep them on the hook for our own personal gain, to kind of cause them to be reliant on us, something that Dr. Rod has mentioned previously around, us being the provider for people. Remember, we're not provider, God's the provider. So we've got to be very careful that we get caught up in these moments of, well, I need to help this person. Like, well, are you being the provider, or are you allowing God to provide through that person, or are you just doing it for personal gain? Those are some big red flags that we need to be very careful of. So we as leaders, make sure we're not abusing our power to try to take advantage of people, to try to seduce people, to try to for our own personal gain. Big warning sign. Big warning sign. Don't do that. Like Dr. Rod said, steward the opportunities, the resources that God has given you. But let's talk about the other side, because I think it was very, very apt, Dr. Rod, that you brought this up before. It was like, well, he was an adult and he could have said no. Yes, and I do want to get to this, because too often we can get caught up in victimhood and, oh, well, they had so much power and influence. Well, this is something that we as 2ICs or up-and-coming leaders, I see too many up-and-coming leaders or aspiring leaders or people that have an incredible future and an incredible calling. They get trapped and they get caught under leaders they get blinded by the light, so to speak. They get blinded by all the fame and all the benefits. Giancarlo could have said no. Obviously he didn't have the moral standings that we do, so he said yes at the first stage, where he shouldn't have even been in that hotel room, shouldn't have even, if you had some moral standings, if you had some you had some good moral grounds and rules that you follow, you wouldn't have even been in that hotel room to even start this thing. But you're right. He had the power to say no. He should have said no. And we should not give up. We as 2ICs and aspiring young leaders, we shouldn't be blinded by the opportunities that are presented to us. We shouldn't give up our values, our moral standings. We shouldn't give up that for an opportunity. Don't start blurring lines. Look, I know I'm on a bit of a rant now, but that's my own story. I know that I was raised in church and I was heavily dedicated, fully in love with Jesus, and dedicated to the church. I was used to preach in church even from a young age, and I was heavily involved and volunteered, and I knew that was my life. And then when I was 18, I blurred one little line, and then another line got blurred, and then another line got blurred, and another line got blurred. And it's so easy to get caught up. I then found myself in a place where literally I was days from ending up in jail. And luckily I had a supernatural encounter with God that protected me from that situation, that allowed me to, warned me, and I chose to go a different path and was saved from that, from the path that I was going to take me to. But I know it was because I blurred one line, I blurred another one, and I just made excuses along the way. And so be very careful as a young leader, as someone aspiring, that you're not blurring those lines because you're chasing a benefit. Dr. Rod, how do we, now this is, really put your business pastor's hat on, right? How do we avoid blurring lines for the chasing the benefit, the fame, the glory, the opportunities that, because when you're young and influential, and when I say young, like I still consider myself young, and when I get around some leaders, I kind of find myself, I have to check myself to go, what am I, too susceptible to poor influence here? How do we avoid blurring those lines?
First of all, you've got to know where the lines are, I think.
Good. I like that.
That's really important. Know where the lines are. So you can't really go into business without knowing what your bottom line is. And I don't mean profit here. I mean, what am I not going to compromise?
Yeah.
And the Old Testament has plenty to say about things like accurate weights and measures, and giving the labourer his due, and all kinds of things. Don't muzzle the ox when the ox is working. All kinds of things, which I think give some pretty good guidance in terms of how you should undertake business. So you've got to know where the lines are, and because if you don't know where they are, you're going to blur them. That's for sure and certain, because they won't be lines at all. They'll be big fat sausages.
Yes.
So I think that's quite important. And look, it's going to help to have some wise mentors around you. Maybe mentoring isn't the right name, but just gather some people around you who can share wisdom with you. I think that's important. Make sure you've got people who are praying for you. Some people have intercessors, and I think that's probably a good idea. And by the way, if you've got people who are putting hours and hours every week into praying and interceding for you, you should be paying them as well. And we can have a long discussion about that another day, but I don't think that you should just expect people to give up hours and hours of their time to pray for your business or to intercede for you, and not recognise that they've got bills to pay. But anyway, that's another issue. And look, when you've got an inkling that something isn't right, just don't do it, because you said you just blurred the line once, and then you compromised and compromised and compromised and ended up in a place where you didn't really want to be. Yes. And you see this in business as well. People end up in a place where they don't want to be, and they're compromising on the quality of their product. Maybe they're abusing their staff by not paying them the legal rate. Maybe they're cheating on the tax that they pay, a whole range of things. So you've got to be pretty certain right at the outset where your bottom line is, and know for sure and certain you're not going to go below that, as it were. That's really, really important. But you know what? You need someone to hold up your arm, just like Moses had. Moses had Aaron. You need a few Aarons around you. You need a few people who can offer you some wisdom. You need some people who will pray for you. And I think that's really important, because it's pretty tough being in business. It's not easy. We look around and see so-called successful people in business. We don't know their story. We don't know that they might have been bankrupt 3 times before they ended up succeeding.
Yeah.
So we just got to make sure that we know where the lines are, and we've got people around us who can help us stick to those lines.
Yeah, that's good. Like you are for me. the business pastor, Dr. Rod. That's what I love about having you on my board and in my life is, we speak. Yes, we speak on this podcast every week, but we also speak afterwards, and we're constantly speaking about other things. And to make sure I keep in check, I've got my intercessors, I've got my psychologist, I've got my, I've got the people that are speaking into my life and making sure that I keep that right. I just wanted to kind of share.
Sorry,
go, Doctor.
A couple of things I do want to say is, and one of this came out from the interview. Juan Carlos was talking about being groomed. That makes him a victim. No. Listen, in business, we're not victims. All right, we're not victims. We're not being driven to do things by our competition or by our circumstances. So we've just got to forget victimhood isn't something that Christians should ever label themselves with. They should never be victims. The Bible tells us we're actually victorious. We're victorious in Christ. Even if we're going bankrupt, we're still victorious in Christ. We're not the victim. Certainly, our circumstances have influence on our outcomes, as do our attitudes. But we mustn't think of ourselves as victims, because we just can't succeed. We can't rise up and meet the challenges if we think we're victims, because as soon as we become a victim, everything that happens to us is somebody else's fault.
Well, the thing is if you're a victim, you literally have no power. Like you're saying you have no power. So if you're acting like a victim, you're saying that you're giving your power to someone else. You have no power. And we're talking about use or abuse of power. You're not using your power. If you're not taking ownership for the situation, if you're not taking ownership and saying, yep, you know what? I said yes to it. I was seduced. I made the decision to go up. He said yes to that. He said yes to the next trip. He said yes to the opportunity. Even though he said, I felt uncomfortable and I didn't want to do it, but he still went into business with them. It's you're right. Like, we can't play the victim anymore. We have to take ownership and take the power back. Let's talk about people abusing power over us. Well, let's take our power back and use our power to make the right decisions. I think that's really good, Dr. Rob. That's really good. Using your power. Don't give it up as a victim. One thing I did want to say, like Dr. Rod said about, you got to know where your lines are. And in business, we talk about this quite a lot with Dr. Rod, it's your values. You have to have your guiding posts, your guiding posts along your path, your markers, to make sure you know where you're going to go in business and the decisions you're going to make. They have your core values. You have to have your core values. One thing I do with all my clients, we set our core values. Actually, just today I was in a session with a client and we referred back to their, a number of times they're trying to make a decision on something. We just kept referring back to their values. Well, how does that line up with your values? We're trying to create a new path forward for a new branch of their business, making sure we integrate our values so we do it properly. Do you need to know what your core values are? And you need to have them written down and be as part of your everyday business decisions. But also personally, you need to know what your values are. You need to know where the lines are. And I'll tell you what, like I said, I blurred one line, I blurred another line, and I blurred another line, and I end up in a totally place that God did not want me at all. And so when I came back to Christ and kind of reset and kind of realized my ways and realized how big God's grace is, I sat down and I literally wrote out a list. Like, okay, the next time I date someone, these are I went to write 10 commandments of how to date someone. I end up with 11. These are my 10 commandments for myself of how to, and they end up being 11 of how I'm going to date. I'm not going to be alone with them at night. I'm not going to find myself laying down with them. I'm not going to, these are I know that these are my lines, because as soon as I cross that line, I know that that's going to be a sticky, that's blurring the line. And over that just leads to something else. So make sure, even for your dating, for business, everything like that, make sure you're outlining What are your lines? You got to know what your clear lines are, because if you don't know what your clear lines are, it's very easy to blur them. Now, talking about abuse of power, using and abusing power, let's go to the word and see what abusing power looks like. And we're going through Luke and looking at all, what leadership lessons can we get from Luke. And in talking about today's topic about abusing power, obviously there's a lot of messages that Jesus speaks about with like the Pharisees and everyone abusing power, and there was a lot of things we could have spoken about. But this passage jumped out at me. Now this section is two verses. So I'm just going to read the whole part. And it's Luke 22 verse 63 and 65. Sorry, 3 verses. The men, and the title is The Guards Mock Jesus. The men who were guarding Jesus began mocking and beating him. They blindfolded him and demanded, "Prophesy, who hit you?" And they said many other insulting things to him. Obviously, these guards were abusing their power. They had a prisoner that they were responsible for, and they were abusing their power. I suppose the thing that I kind of wanted to talk about with this is the ultimate, right? The what happens when you abuse your power, right? Because we've spoken about a bunch of different topics today, about different stories of people abusing their power, using their power, abusing their power. And these are only some of the stories of the millions that are happening every day, and these are the ones that have been caught out. What happens? Obviously, these guards were abusing their power by beating Jesus because they thought that he wouldn't be able to do anything. Dr. Rod, what's going to happen to those people, those guards who abused their power?
Well, if they repented and turned to Jesus as their Lord and Saviour, we're going to see them in heaven. But if they didn't, it's a different story altogether. On the judgment day, they'll be cast into the fiery pit, and they'll suffer the consequences, at least of eternal separation from God, which is as bad as being in the fiery pit, or they'll literally be in a fiery pit. There's a bit of debate over that, but my belief is that there's a literal fiery pit. But even if there isn't, I think eternal separation from God, you're going to wish you were in a fiery pit. It'd be better than separation from God anyway. It's interesting, that this abuse goes against all legal and ethical codes that existed even in ancient times. So although the law protected Jesus from this kind of physical abuse, it happened anyway. And that, of course, is the ultimate abuse of power, when those who have the power know that there will be no repercussions for them, despite what the legal code might say.
Yeah.
And that's probably the very worst abuse of power, because it's an illegitimate use of power, absolutely illegitimate. In this case, most likely it was illegal. So
on that point, I kind of want to delve into that a little bit of like, why do you think it is that people abuse their power? In this situation, it may be slightly different to some of the other stories we've shared, but it's still, there's got to be a reason why people are abusing their power. What do you think it is?
Look, I don't think it's simple, and I think there can be a number of reasons. Sometimes it's because people feel incomplete or insufficient unless they are demonstrating that they do have power over somebody else. And I think that's often what leads to abuse in the family. Sometimes someone can develop a hatred of ideas or a group of people, and that will lead them to abuse power because it's the outworking of that very, very strong emotion. And I do think we're seeing some of this in the world today, whereby people, we call it the cancel culture, whereby people become so aggressive if you hold certain views that they actually turn it into hatred against you as a person.
Yeah.
And, there are all kinds of results that flow from that. So that's another kind of abuse. And sometimes, quite honestly, it has to do with the personal characteristics of somebody who just tends to be, sadistic. And it just brings them pleasure. Abusing others brings them pleasure. So there's at least three reasons behind abuse of power.
Yeah,
Probably more.
You really hit the nail on the head. I was going to say really two, insecurity. I think that people a lot of examples of poor leadership that I see is insecurity. Trying to overcompensate, trying to dominate, trying to control because of insecurity. And I would actually say your second one that you were talking about kind of falls into that first one, is they feel insecure about not being able to control the situation or whatever, so they overcompensate by doing that as well. If they don't agree with what you agree with, they're insecure in their own ability to be able to live in a world with people that don't agree with them, and so they overcompensate. And so I kind of feel like, I know we talk about people abusing power and we're like, oh, nasty, we can be all against them, and especially these soldiers or these guards that were abusing Jesus, we can quite easily look down on them. But I look at it slightly differently and look at them and go, they're just insecure people. They're just insecure people that are overcompensating, that they're insecure. And I actually feel like the number one cause of insecurity is lack of purpose, lack of understanding of purpose. If you don't know what your purpose is, you lack identity, you lack that confidence in what you're doing, because if there's no purpose in what you're doing and you don't know the purpose in what you're doing, there is insecurity there. And I kind of condensing pretty much our entire course, free leadership development program to below, where we talk about discovering your purpose and how purpose is actually the core of really good leadership. But I believe that insecurity is actually probably the main cause of abuse of power. But Dr. Rod, as you said, what I believe the second reason is just narcissism. There's narcissistic people out there that just thrive on, or sadistic people that just thrive on other people hurting. So I suppose to kind of sum that up, actually, before I go on, Dr. Rod, do you have anything more to talk about the guards mocking Jesus?
I'm sure that at least some of them regretted it later. And I think that's probably the experience that many had. And, we don't know whether some of them might have actually surrendered to Jesus Christ as their Lord and Saviour, that's a great thing. We should rejoice in that. Yeah. And of course, Christianity went on to have a massive influence on the world, and it still does. It actually brought civil into civilization. And despite the fact that Jesus suffered such horrendous abuse, his message nevertheless became widely established and has really driven Western civilization now for a couple of thousand years.
Yeah.
We need to get it back. We really need to get it back, because I think we've lost something of it, particularly in probably in the last 10 years, maybe even less than that. We've retrogressed significantly in Western nations, and it would do us good, I think, to get back to some of the principles of the Christian faith surrounding the way in which we regard one another and treat one another. In particular, that we allow people freedom to think, freedom to speak, and freedom to act within the reasonable boundaries established by Christian principles for living.
Yeah, that's really good, and kind of good segue into our summary. Is you talking about we've regressed? Well, we need to stand up. We need to make sure we are using our power, not abusing it, but using the power. Don't be afraid. Don't cower back. And like Joe Rogan is using his platform and his influence to try to spark healthy debate. We should not be cowering away from the debate. We should be using our power, our influence, our knowledge, and our experience to bring good information, good conversations into the mix, rather than just cowering away and being afraid of all the people that may be abusing their power. And make sure, just so we understand, why is there an abuse of power? I suppose just to wrap this up, why is there an abuse of power? Like we said, look, someone might just be sadistic, narcissistic, or whatever. Yeah, let's leave that. There's nothing we can do for them other than pray for them, right? Protect ourselves. Go and research. Actually, going on this topic that Dr. Rob was saying earlier, was like we need to be educated. Well, educate yourself. If you feel like you're suffering under narcissistic leaders or whatever, then go and research about narcissism. You'll probably find that most of them are not actually narcissistic. They may have narcissistic tendencies, but not narcissist as a whole. Get educated on all that stuff. However, most people that are abusing power are abusing their power because they are lacking confidence. They're outside of their purpose. They're insecure. Let's just have pity for them. Feel sorry for them. Pray for them. Let's offer them our love and support to try to help them become more secure, and then hopefully they won't be abusing their power so much. But make sure that you're not one of those ones that blurs the lines, that gets lured in to bad situations because of power, because of fame, because of benefit, because of money, whatever. And make sure, please, my encouragement, please, don't be a leader that is abusing power and taking advantage of those people below you. Look, Dr. Rod, thank you once again for sharing your wisdom and time with us today.
It's an absolute privilege, Craig. Thank you for the opportunity.
And guys, if you've enjoyed this, if any of this has helped you, give it a thumbs up. Put a comment below as what your thoughts are, how it's challenged your leadership, and maybe how you are being challenged about not abusing your power. And hey, if you want to see more stuff like this, we'd be honored if you would consider subscribing to the channel. But that is us. Thank you for watching. Be blessed and have a spectacular week, and we'll see you next week.